Welcome back everyone to Exploring the Coast with Hannah. On this week's episode, we're going to be learning what the tide means in tide pools. Let's go.
What is a tide? Tides are very long period waves that move through the oceans in response to the forces exerted by the moon and the sun, which we will learn about later in this presentation. Tides start in the ocean and move towards the coastline where they regularly rise and fall. This animation simulates those changes. As the tide rises, water moves towards shore. This is called a flood current. As the tide recedes, the water moves away from the shore. This is called an ebb current. The difference in height between the high tide and low tide is called the tidal range. There are three types of tides: diurnal, semidiurnal, and semidiurnal mixed tides. A diurnal tide is an area that has one high and one low tide every lunar day. Many areas in the Gulf of Mexico have these types of tides. A semidiurnal tide is a type of tide where an area has two high and two low tides of approximately equal size every lunar day. Many areas on the east coast of North America have these tides. A mixed semidiurnal tide is a type of tide where an area has two high and two low tides every lunar day. However, the tidal height between the either high tide or low tides are much different. So as you can see here on this graph, there's about a 1 meter difference between each high tide and each low tide that day. The moon has a major influence on the Earth's tides as well as the sun. Solar tides from the sun are about half as large as lunar tides from the moon and are expressed as a variation of lunar tidal patterns, not as a separate set of tides. When the sun, moon, and earth are in alignment at the time of a new or full moon, this greatly increases solar and lunar forces and creates extra high tides and very low tides, which are called spring tides. 1 week later, when the sun and moon are at right angles to each other, either at the first or third quarter moons, the solar tide partially cancels out the lunar tide and produces moderate tides known as neap tides. So, what's the difference between a lunar day versus a solar day? Many people assume that our high and low tides occur at the same time every day. However, tidal cycles do not have the same time period as our 24-hour day, which we use in relation to the Earth's rotation around the sun. Here's why. A solar day, which is the time that it takes for a specific site on Earth to rotate from one exact point under the sun to the same point under the sun, takes 24 hours. This is the time period we use. A lunar day, however, is 50 minutes longer than a solar day because the moon revolves around the Earth in the same direction that the Earth rotates around its axis. So it takes the Earth 50 more minutes to catch up to the moon. This makes every tide in a given tidal cycle occur 50 minutes later every day. So if you went out on a low tide one day at 8 a.m., the low tide the next day would not occur until approximately 8:50 a.m. or so. Here you can see how the tides affect one particular beach. During high tide, which is on the left-hand side where you can see all of that beach and that rocky area is completely covered by water. And then on the picture on the right-hand side, you can see at low tide how much the water had receded and how much of that rocky area is now exposed. What's a good low tide to go out for tide pooling or for rocky intertidal research? The LiMPETS program only conducts rocky intertidal field programs when the low tide goes down to at least 0.2 feet or lower. But you may be asking, but wait, what does zero point 0.2 feet mean? Let's take a look. Tidal height compared to sea level. In the United States, mean sea level is defined as the mean height of the surface of the sea for all stages of the tide over a 19-year period, which is called the metonic cycle. This is the relation to the average height the ocean to the adjacent land is. So that means if a low tide on a day is said to be at 1 foot, that means the tidal height is 1 foot above mean sea level, which is considered to be at 0 feet. So what are the best times to go tide pooling? Well, for the LiMPETS program, we have to go at tides that are 0 0.2 feet or lower, since that height, most of the intertidal zones are exposed for us to collect data. However, if you just would like to go out to do some recreational tide pooling, any tides that are at 1.5 feet or lower are great to go out for tide pool exploration. Also, secret tip, the best low tides are when they are below mean sea level. So that means anytime you see a negative tide, you should definitely go out. So before you go out tide pooling, you first have to check when the tides are that day. So I'm going to walk you through how to read a tide chart. So this is a tide chart for Monterey Bay, and we're going to be looking at today, May 26th tides. So first look for the month, and then you're going to look for the day. Giving a closer look at the day, it has the 4 different tides that we have. Because remember, we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day here in California. And remember what those are called? Those are mixed semi-diurnal tides, because as well, our 2 high tides and 2 low tides also differ in sizes. So we're going to look at the first low tide of the day, and as you can see, we have a negative number. So where it says 8:15 a.m., negative 0.7, and negative 21. This is the first low tide of the day. And if you look at it, it's a negative tide. Remember, I said tides with a negative tide are always the best ones to go out on because more of the intertidal is exposed. So you can see here, it's earlier in the morning at 8:15 a.m. That negative 0.7 is the tidal height measured in feet. So again, it is 0.7 feet below mean sea level. And then the negative 21 number is just the tidal height in centimeters. So for today, the 8:15 low tide is the best tide to go out tide pooling today. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget, a new video of Exploring the Coast with Hannah drops every Tuesday at 11 a.m. on the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History's website on the Museum to You page.